Welcome to Ridiculously Happy Pplcast. I'm Sophia Lemon, and today I am with Shayna Beeksma. Shayna A. Beeksma is an award-winning lawyer and the founder of Beeksma Law. She received her JD from Osgoode Hall Law University in 2011 and was called to the Ontario Bar in 2012, and she founded Beeksma Law in 2018. A passionate innovator and entrepreneur, Shayna's main practice area is in real estate law, comprised of estate litigation, estate administration, and estate planning, while also incorporating business law, including not-for-profit law, real estate law, commercial leasing, construction law, and general civil litigation into her practice. While her clients value her knowledge, experience, and legal skills, it's her firm's customer-centric approach that sets Beeksma Law apart. Welcome to the show, Shayna.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. And a slight correction, the main area is estate law. I think when you were reading it, you probably added the real estate there. So just to clarify, estate law primarily, but with all those other areas as well. So but thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to have this conversation with you.
I was going to say it's going to be a fun one, but I don't think it's necessarily a fun conversation, but necessary.
Yeah, but we'll make it as lighthearted as we can.
I am guaranteed to be laughing on this show. That's just how it's going to work. It's just my
Well, you are
personality.
a ridiculously happy person.
Exactly.
And
there
you try to
go.
attract ridiculously happy people.
That is
So
true.
the tone should be as light as possible.
Exactly. Now, we'll get into the topic of this episode in a little bit, but first I wanted to hear, since we've heard a little bit about your professional life, a little bit about your personal life. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and all of that delightful stuff?
Yes, so I am Jamaican by background. I grew up in Jamaica and I came here as a teenager at 15. I am happily married to my wonderful spouse of 12 years and counting, Jason. And together we have three little munchkins who are 6, 3, and 1. So we have a very full house, very busy days, but it's a good kind of crazy. And we all know it's a season. People who have older kids, right? I mean, you have some stepkids, you know that these days of their littleness don't last forever. And before you know it, they're teenagers, perhaps even cranky teenagers. So we are soaking up, at least the fact that they're cute, at this time and balancing it all while running a business, scaling it, all those things. So, but yes, we can do hard things and we can do it while still being ridiculously happy people.
Agreed. Now, as you're saying this, and the listeners probably can't even hear it, but I could hear a little bit, a faint cry from a 1-year-old in the background.
Yes. Yep. Somebody who really wants to get into the home office that mommy has locked them out of. Correct. So that mommy can record in peace with you.
Yes.
A special shout out to all the parents out there who are working from home, running their business from home, and may still have little ones, especially because it's not school time yet. So
yeah,
this is why filters were invented for video conferencing.
Filters and locks on doors and
yes. Whatever measures you got to take. Exactly.
And other parents.
Yes. The village, right? Like yes. Through your marriage and other people that, you need it. There's no way you can do it without it.
I'm not going to lie. I rely on my parents a lot for my dog. So
yeah. Whatever you got to do, because he too or she too would be a disturbance to you. I mean, prancing into your video conference calls and literally starting to bark if he or she gets a whiff of anything that's like a squirrel by your window.
It's
you
true.
You don't need that. Yeah.
Or like nudging my elbow because he wants pets. But
There you go. So Fur Mom just needs her break to build her business spectacularly without interruption for even just a few hours.
Yeah, that's why I come to the studio.
Exactly.
Do you have any new and exciting stuff going on in your life, Shayna? Or maybe not new and exciting, but just nice?
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of takes us a couple years back now, but since I'm new onto, this podcast, I think what's still exciting 2 years later and has not worn off is just taking a leap, take a bit of a risk in terms of creating one step closer to creating the lifestyle that my husband and I had always wanted. And that was leaving the city in the height of COVID in 2021, we were in Hamilton and selling our Hamilton house and buying a beautiful country property 2.5 hours north. That still hasn't gotten old. And actually, I'm reminded of how lucky we are every time I go back to the GTA and I realize that for us, this was the right move. Just from a, mental health, emotional health, just where you want to be raising your kids and having, a few acres that they can run freely on and have a very different lifestyle than what they otherwise would have had, in the middle of the city. So, yeah, but I mean, it did take, some, I guess, willingness to absorb some risk, right? Having a mostly remote law firm and making it entirely remote so that that could be possible, moving to an area of the country that has fiber optic internet. And knowing that you have to just be willing to think differently, to structure your business differently, especially in a field like law that is very traditional, where people tend to just do things the way that they've always been done without thinking about it. I think that's what I'm just still excited about 2 years later and still most proud of is just that being one of the biggest steps that we've taken towards creating the lifestyle of flexibility and, loved ones time first as much as possible, business second, where you create your business structure around the life you want. Just such a, I think, resonating theme with our generation of the older millennials and younger Gen Xers who are just thinking, there must be a different way. I don't want to be working like a dog till I'm 65, only to then, finally be able to enjoy life. I want to be able to find some way to enjoy things, particularly while I'm younger, particularly while my kids are still, wanting to hang out with me, all those things. So,
I love that you have your kids on Zoom calls, by the way. I've mentioned it a few times. That I'm in a networking group called BNI, and Shayna is a member of the same chapter that I am in, and we get visits regularly from kids, and it is fantastic.
Oh, yes, they make cameos. Yeah. Today they're locked up, but normally for the BNI meetings, because we have that great a vibe in our meeting, it's like, fine, you're awake, come sit and join, and here is a little show like Blippi or whatever that you can watch silently while we still continue running with it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is the reality of life. And if we're going to pretend like, everything is professional all the time, that is a bit of a lie. So I like the glimpse into people's actual lives. Like, I am a multifaceted individual.
Exactly. And I find that there's a lot more tolerance, if not embracing of that since COVID, when so many people were forced to work from home without childcare, without schools being open. So I think that's been really useful, frankly. And because before that, I'd seen a couple models of women-run law firms, small women-run law firms, one in BC, one in Brampton, that embraced having children at the brick and mortar office. Like as in children of, owners and staff. So that having children around in a professional setting was intentionally normalized. And I think that was pre-COVID. I always admired that, but I thought, how do they do that without losing credibility? Because you have to work so hard for credibility as women, and kind of, I guess, perhaps is a good segue into our theme today, especially women of color. All the barriers that we do face, thinking that, man, maybe that's something that only, white guys can get away with, having kids at the office, but still being, perceived as professional. But if women, let alone women of color, have kids at the office, we already have, extra hoops to jump through to show that we are competent and professional and, experts in our field. Do I sabotage myself by having my children visible, and I guess a crack in that facade or so? Like, am I compromising my business? So, and this is a very real, it's reality, right? And I think it highlights that even in a place like Canada, which has so many freedoms that are not present around the world, that we still live in different worlds in the same society, even at the same class level, that a day in the life of somebody that looks very different from you, gender-wise, race-wise, accent-wise, even things like visible religious head coverings,
Mhm.
will be very different if you're to walk in that person's shoes and you're not that person. Your day-to-day interactions will be very different
Mhm.
than what you may experience as, you know, you say an unassuming white person who's
Mhm.
taken for granted to be Canadian, to be local, to be, all of the accepted things that will open doors more easily for you. So, yeah. So I'm happy that we're discussing the topic of diversity today.
Yeah, and that is an excellent jumping off point for this particular conversation, and not just diversity, but I'm going to be very direct, probably with a lot of my language today. You
Which
and
is good.
I live in a part of the world that is predominantly populated by white people.
Yes. Especially up here 2.5 hours north outside of
Yes.
Hamilton.
And this particular part of the world, I estimate that we're about 10 years behind in practically everything related to diversity. And that'd be your heritage, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, all of it. And I keep hearing from the people in my life, and mostly the straight white men in my life, about how they are afraid to speak on topics that don't directly involve them these days because they are afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's understandable. I mean, you grow up in an area like this, which is, mostly people of Irish heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And you live in this kind of sheltered environment, it can start to become difficult feeling comfortable with change when
Mm-hmm.
you just don't understand it. And this is something that I really saw with my grandpa, and I have to give my grandpa kudos. He was a farm boy. He lived in the country. He farmed his entire life on the same property forever. And when he retired from farming, he moved into town and he took up gardening, and he was an amazing gardener. And he was the type of person who didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable ever, and
Mm-hmm.
would rarely ask for help, and fantastic human being, and wasn't necessarily exposed to a whole lot of differentness in his life.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a Muslim family that moved in next door to him. And so he'd be out gardening all day, and they'd be out gardening and on their property, and they'd start talking over, well, there wasn't a fence,
Mm-hmm.
but over the fence. They'd
Mm-hmm.
be chatting, and then, we'd see my grandpa later on, and he'd be like, you know what? They are really nice people.
There you go. And isn't that interesting because it highlights how important it is to meet people and foster relationships with people
Mm-hmm.
who are of a different background. Oh, thank you. There's my 6-year-old giving me a beautiful drawing of Jupiter,
Oh,
in case
nice.
you're curious. Well done, my little one. Well done. But yes, that it's when you develop relationships with the others, right? Like whatever they
Mm-hmm.
are, then you start to realize that they are not the others. They
Mm-hmm.
are Sophia. They are
Mm-hmm.
Shayna. They are okay. They're humans. They're
Mm-hmm.
very similar to you in all the key ways, and that the differences become interesting. Food, language,
Mm-hmm.
customs, beliefs, and but it's easy to have assumptions, especially if you glean them from Fox News, or
Mm-hmm.
sources like that, without actually meeting and speaking to people and understanding through developing relationship, friendships, collegiality about what is a day in their life like? What struggles are they facing? How is it for them when they're applying for jobs? Are
Mm-hmm.
they having to change up their name a bit when they're applying for jobs? Like I know some Black female friends of mine in particular who may have a bit more of, for lack of a better way of putting it, a quintessential Black name. It could be very African in origin, or it could be, one of the more African American, derived names. But who, if they have a more standard quote unquote English sounding middle name, that they may go by the middle name on their resume. So, say a cousin of mine, whose name is Jamila Elizabeth, she just went by J. Elizabeth, so that she got more callbacks on her resume. And she's not alone, because by putting Jamila, suddenly it reeked of in terms of employers. She's Black, she's ethnic, she may be Muslim. Is that the kind of person that they think is qualified? And people make that judgment so subconsciously, a thing called unconscious bias, right? That as they're flipping through resumes, they may just toss her resume aside because that's not their fit. That's not who they're looking for. And not give it a second thought. It's not ill intent. It's just how their mind is structured because of how they've been exposed or lack thereof, and who they then determine to be worthy, qualified, worth interviewing. And so that's just one of the ways that, other people can operate in a very different world than your quintessential white person in a predominantly white area, who is not foreign, who has no accent, probably of Irish or Scottish descent up in these parts. And if anything, it may be a class issue, but otherwise, they can walk through the world in a very similar fashion to most of their peers and really be treated on the basis of their merit, but not have the other layers that can take away from perceptions of their qualification, which the rest of us do have to battle with.
I really think that, especially with regard to these conversations, we really let feelings get in the way of logic, which, okay, understandable. While we might be a logical species, feelings come first. All of the books I'm reading these days talk about, your reptilian brain. It developed first. It is the most powerful. It acts before everything else in your life because, lions are scary and we need to get away from them. But then we react to mild discomfort with the same response we would if we came across a lion, which, by the way, if I came across a lion, frankly, I think I would absolutely freeze. But
yes, fight or flight. The adrenaline kicks
absolutely.
in. And then people get very defensive. And then you see this, especially in the age of social media spots, where they are behind a screen. They're not actually speaking to a live individual, even via video conference, where you can see their facial expressions or whatnot. So people commenting with impunity, but not realizing that, maybe they need not feel attacked, by the suggestion that maybe you too have unconscious bias. We all do to some extent. And maybe introspection and a humble attitude towards listening and learning and then seeking to do better isn't a bad thing for all of us, but especially those of the subject matter today who, the straight white men who may not know what to say. So at least that's already starting off with good intent and not thinking that they know everything. Because I think the problem is that when you're talking about those that feel like they know everything, then that's a harder place to start. But those that are more so just scared about what to say, I first of all applaud them for just being concerned enough to care about that, because that's already step one. But then step two being that silence is enabling the status quo. So when they are silent because they're too scared to say something, then they are enabling, what's effectively injustice in many ways, be it on a large scale or small scale, to continue. And so they do need to say something when they have the opportunity to, especially one thing that, is very common in terms of the, and I hate how the right has really tried to twist, social justice language as if it's a bad thing, and it's not. So I will be using some of those terms, but, trying to show listeners that these are not harmful things to get defensive about. For instance, white privilege. It is not something to get defensive about. It doesn't mean that as a white person, you need to feel guilt for being white. That is not how it goes. What it means is that, as we were alluding to earlier in this conversation, is that it means that in a predominantly white society, such as especially where we are up in these cottage country parts, it means that you walk through the world, class aside, you walk through the world having assumptions made about you that are positive or at least neutral, having doors open to you that, based on assumptions and stereotypes that are at least neutral, if not positive, that persons who are not white, let alone persons who are much more melanated, darker skin toned in complexion, would not be afforded. Simply because you are the normal, quote unquote, person up here. And the rest of us are other. We are immigrant. We are foreign. We are different. And so then the labels that will come to people's minds in terms of stereotyping, persons who are not white, like just the fact that you walk through the world differently, that is white privilege. And so, but then the question is, okay, you're aware of it, number one. And then the second thing is, what do you do with that? So, great example, my husband, who is Dutch, of Dutch Canadian background. He used to work before he started the firm, he used to work in an engineering firm where he was a technologist. And one of his colleagues had his master's in aerospace or aeronautical engineering. Thank you, little one. Very well done. I just received a picture of the planet Earth.
Oh, wow.
But his colleague with that master's in aeronautical or aerospace engineering was Persian, freshly arrived from Iran. So in terms of qualifications, much more qualified, right, than my husband. But yet in this very, to put it bluntly, white guy, oriented firm, straight white guy oriented firm, his colleague would have suggestions at team meetings, right? And would not be listened to, wouldn't be given the floor. Clearly, the guy is far more educated than most of the people in the room. And so my husband, based on, conversations that we have had being married to me in an interracial relationship, I encouraged him and he did, like take the floor because he was readily given the floor as a fellow straight white guy in the room. And then he would say, Arash has he has a good point to make. Let's listen to Arash, like that kind of thing. That's a good example of using your white privilege because now you're taking up space that is afforded to you, but now you're giving that space to somebody that is not going to be ordinarily listened to, not because of a lack of merit or qualifications, but because of the assumptions, negative assumptions, stereotypes that are made that that person is somehow not as worthy of being paid attention to, not as worthy of giving suggestions on this team lead project. Right? It's challenging those assumptions because you can really help to level the playing field on an individual basis just by speaking up, realizing that you have privilege. And then when you have the opportunity to use it to help to level the playing field, do it. But doing nothing does nothing and actually arguably exacerbates the situation.
So I know exactly what the mental response from a lot of people listening to this is going to be right now. Well, I don't think that. I do not judge. I do not. Yeah, I do not judge. I do not discriminate. I don't act like that, which is great. That's good. Okay. So now's when you learn to not respond with, I don't do that. And instead, respond as if you are supportive and care.
Exactly.
And like I was saying earlier, we really let our feelings guide things. So like as soon as you say that to me, I'm thinking, oh my God, she thinks I'm a racist.
No.
I get all butthurt and I start responding like I am offended. And
then you become the victim, which doesn't solve the problem.
Exactly. That just changes the topic entirely. And and so my suggestion for everyone, you're going to have like real life ideas for people through this episode. And my suggestion for everyone is to get a much thicker skin with this topic, but everything in general in life, because we do not have to take on other people's feelings
Hmm.
as offense to ourselves. We do not need to
No,
react as if we think someone else thinks that we have done something wrong.
no.
Um,
Unless you have, and if you have, then own up to it because we all make mistakes. And we'll
yeah.
say, and we all are in situations where it's like, oh my goodness, I realized that came out wrong. My
Hmm.
apologies, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not sure how to have properly responded, then ask the person. And more people
Hmm.
than not are very willing to give you some insight into perhaps what you should have said, what would
Hmm.
have been less cringeworthy, less hurtful. And it's not about some people do have soft skin in these days and ages. I get
Hmm.
that. But they're more often than not very reasonable reactions to, oh, you shouldn't
Yeah.
have said that. Like for instance, marrying into predominantly an entirely white family.
Hmm.
There were some interesting comments in the beginning from small town relatives who mean well, but their comments were
Cringy.
very cringy. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. They have improved dramatically since then. And the key has been that they were willing to learn and listen and understand. But in the beginning, there were comments made such as, oh, to a little child, you think Shayna's your slave, don't you? Ha 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 ha. I'm thinking
That's
that
that's not quite
that
cringy. That's a little beyond cringy.
yeah, it is. It is. And being
Wow.
like thinking, oh, you think that's not a joke. No, you don't. But then that person has since come so far. And
Hmm.
actually, in the time of the George Floyd protests and whatnot, she really was actively, seeking, my input and advice in terms of what can she do in small town Canada to
Hmm.
be not be a problem, to not be a source
Yeah.
of continuing to be that ignorant person
Hmm.
that is without intending to, isolating the persons of color in her life
Hmm.
um, because of ignorance. So I applaud her because she's come a full 180. But yes,
Hmm.
it started off with cringy comments like that, which is among the most cringe. But those comments can be made very innocuously.
Hmm.
Even up here, I mean, to this day, I think there's some people, I've interacted with them even up to a couple of weeks ago at our church who see nothing wrong with saying, somebody's mulatto like you, Shayna. And it's like, that's an outdated term. We don't use that term anymore. So like you said, 10 years behind, I think it's some
Yeah.
ways 40 years behind. But that's okay
Wow.
because you don't just sit there and get offended and say, don't you dare call me mulatto. You say, by the way, you know that there are more appropriate terms nowadays. There are problems now with the term mulatto, and they're not unreasonable because, of course, the first defense is, oh, people are just being too politically correct, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, no, let's break it down. You know what mulatto means? Like mule. You're basically calling somebody a donkey. That was accepted 100 years ago and 50 years ago, but thankfully we're moving on from calling people animals.
Hmm.
So especially because of the dim view that mixed race persons were given, like basically being, I mean, their black ancestry for those that were mixed with black, black persons were chattel, equal to animals, and so mixed race progeny were still a form of an animal. It's like,
Hmm.
how about we use more appropriate, uplifting terms, especially if
Hmm.
you are professing to be a Christian and follow Jesus and all those things, then you should be seeking more so than the average person to not be belittling intentionally or unintentionally, to
Hmm.
be uplifting. So let's rethink our language. And I think that's the key thing is just when you're sharing with people, like just understanding where it's coming from, that it's not just, snowflakeness or political correctness. It's this is the origin of the word and this is why it's wrong.
I like what you said about rethinking language. And also, like you brought up the word ignorance. And I know, I mean, I will go ahead and say it. I'm an ignorant person. I am a human being. I
Mm-hmm.
do not know everything. There's
Mm-hmm.
no chance in the world that I am ever going to be not ignorant about something. My
Mm-hmm.
scientific knowledge is pretty limited. I am very ignorant about
Same
science.
here.
For
Same here. We
example,
all are. We all are
yeah.
ignorant. If anybody says they're not ignorant, then
Hmm.
they are just completely out to
Hmm.
lunch.
Yeah. And you don't, I mean, I'm ignorant to your life experience. I don't
Hmm.
know every second of your life. So while
Hmm.
I can treat you with respect, I'm never going to, know how you feel about, any topic really, unless
Hmm.
I know you extremely well.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not going to be familiar with most of what you feel about most
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
So the goal is not to turn yourself into the person who never says the wrong thing, because if you think
Hmm.
that's what you're going to achieve, that
It's impossible.
you're going to be keeping your mouth shut all the time, because you're just going to have to
Hmm.
not comment on anything ever. You're going to
Hmm.
say and do the wrong thing
Hmm.
periodically, but I don't think it's necessarily the first thing that you do or the first thing that comes out of your mouth that is the problem, but how you respond to it. So if
Exactly.
you see that you hurt someone's feelings or
Hmm.
you made them cringe, that's a time when you can just listen to what they have to say and
Yeah.
then reassess what you have said. And I mean, you can actively choose not to listen to what someone says to you or not take it in, not change how you speak in the future. But probably if
Hmm.
you make a point of listening to how that person feels about it because of
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z and the meaning that it has to them, and you put
Hmm.
yourself in their shoes and think, okay, I wouldn't want to feel like a cow.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
Maybe I'll stop saying that
exactly.
in the future. Do
Yeah.
you really want to make anyone feel like that?
And
Like,
here's some better language that you can
mhm,
use, right? That
mhm,
still conveys, what you're trying to say. You're describing someone's appearance, which is fine. We
mhm,
all do that. We categorize things, but in a far more benign way.
mhm,
It's simple. It's simple.
mhm,
It really is that straightforward. And yeah, for me, for instance, I mean, I'm not a member of the LGBTQ
mhm,
community plus, right? So I have a lot that I've been learning from friends and colleagues of mine who are in that community. And I shut up and I listen. I don't presume to know their experience, right? Especially from what I understand, the layers that occur when someone is, a person of color in the
mhm,
LGBTQ plus community. So it's like this is where I listen and I learn and I think about the language that I use. I think about assumptions I may make. I think about how I can be a more loving person,
mhm,
inclusive person towards them, because that's not a community I'm familiar with. I
mhm,
know that I have a lot of ignorance about that. So like I said, shut
mhm,
up and listen and then do better.
mhm.
It's kind of the blunt way of saying it. Shut up, listen,
Yeah.
do better. Yeah.
That's a maybe a good title for this episode. So I am also not a member necessarily of the LGBTQ plus community. That said, I was a teenage girl at one point, and Kevin has a teenage girl at the moment. And from both Kevin and his son slash her brother, I have heard, why is she doing this? Like, I don't understand. And then I have the opportunity to tell them, well, this is just what happens to teenage girls. Like, she is chock
Yes.
full of hormones. She's confused. She's angry. Like, as an adult woman, I could just spontaneously be angry all of a sudden for no no reason that I can
And
guess
and hey,
at.
you and I got like perimenopause coming up in the next 10 years. So probably be reverting from what I understand to some of those teenage girl angst in that
Yeah.
way as our hormones at that point will start
Yeah.
going haywire.
And then when Kevin asks the question about, the non-binary topics these days or transgendered topics, and I don't understand, I can say, well, yeah, think of it like this. Like, I understand how disconnected his daughter might feel from her body and frustrated and
Hmm.
all of that painful stuff that you feel when you're a teenage girl. Now, imagine that you feel all of that, plus you don't actively like the body that you're in. Like, it
Yeah.
feels so unnatural and
And
weird.
foreign.
Yeah. Like, I can understand how if someone was in that space
Mm-hmm.
They just the discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
constant discomfort would,
Mm-hmm.
drive you to do some crazy things in
Mm-hmm.
quotations.
Mm-hmm.
And that,
Mm-hmm.
we can just alleviate all of that by supporting someone for who they are. That's
Mm-hmm. Because one of
I
the main
think,
causes of, depression and suicidal
yeah.
ideations is the fact that they don't have a safe space with their family,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
is supposed to be your ground zero.
Yep.
So when you are actively rejected, ostracized, isolated from your family because of something that you cannot control,
Hmm.
it doesn't help. It worsens the problem. It worsens the problem. And the high rates of suicides among youth who are,
Hmm.
in that community,
Hmm.
we can really do a lot better as a population.
Hmm. And my opinion on that stuff is generally like, why are you talking about not understanding it if you're not in their shoes and you don't understand? Like, it's not something that you need to worry about, really.
No, no.
I mean, is someone else changing their gender or the pronouns you refer to them as? Is that really causing you enough of an issue that
Mm-hmm,
you're going to go out and protest? No
mm-hmm,
one in my family
mm-hmm.
is doing that. I'm talking
No.
about these groups of people who are, but
Yeah.
is that enough to drive you to go out in public and complain about people saying, I want to feel safe and happy in my body?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Really? It's
And
crazy.
it's funny because for a lot of those persons, it's hypocrisy though, because they're saying that you know, say for instance during the pandemic, nobody's going to be forcing a vaccine into me. Bodily autonomy, everything. I have the right to determine what goes into my body, what happens with my body.
Mhm.
But then that kind of stops when it comes to that analysis that, oh, but those people don't have the right to do with their
Mhm.
body as they feel is in good conscience for them.
Mhm.
But no, no, no. It's just for me and people who think like me, but those people, no, 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 what they're doing is wrong. Inconsistency,
Just a little bit.
inconsistent arguments. Yeah,
So
yeah.
you and I worked together a year and a bit ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, did some family photos.
Hmm.
Um, the results of which might not have been super happy for everyone involved.
We love a lot of our photos. They're still up on
Good.
canvases around the house. Some of my favorite moments that you captured of the boys. But yes, but there was one person in particular who was not as thrilled. Yeah.
And so brought up some interesting conversation for me at least. And I wonder if you would
Mhm.
like to just describe the
Yeah,
story from the beginning.
sure. Sure. So Sophia did our family photos about October of 2021, so shortly after we moved up here. And it was, you could say, extended family photos. So not just our immediate family, hubby and the kids, but my mom and my mother-in-law. And my mom, being a Black Jamaican woman, and my mother-in-law being a Dutch woman. And, or should I say, a white Dutch woman to be sure, because there are Dutch people of different backgrounds. So we'll be specific there. And when the photos were returned to us, they were beautiful because Sophia's super talented. But what my mom noticed right away was that there were very few photos of her, particularly with the grandchildren, and double or triple the number of photos with my mother-in-law and or the grandchildren. So my mom noticed that right away, right? And felt it was off-putting for her, right? And I know Sophia, I know that she wouldn't have intentionally had like say 5 or 6 photos of my mother-in-law and 2 or 3 of my mom. I know that, with my mom with her glaucoma and having to wear glasses, sunglasses in particular all the time, it can be harder to get a flattering photo. But the way that my mom received it, nonetheless, was that the white grandparent got much more limelight than the black grandparent. And of course, Sophia did not intend that. I know her very well, but realizing that unintentionally by the fact that she had two or three times more flattering photos of the white grandparent, you know, and did not say intentionally try to edit it out in terms of maybe I'll still just only supply the equal amount that I have for the black grandparents so that nobody feels away about it. That was off-putting enough that my mom was like, I don't know if I want to use her again because I I felt jilted. I felt less than. And some people could say, oh, she's just being very sensitive. But no, think about it. Like if you're getting family photos with your grandchildren, I'm sure there may be some persons who have grandkids, and you felt as if you were not represented hardly compared to the other grandparent or grandparents. And this is probably one of your few times to get photos then. You may feel a little bit put off. What you do about it is then different, but yeah, that was an interesting conversation to have. And I have to applaud Sophia for asking, you know, honestly, feedback. Um, how did that shoot go? Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Sophia, for being willing to have a difficult conversation. Because like I said, I know your heart. I know that there was no ill intent there, but that was how inadvertently it was received. So now we know, right?
Mhm.
And something that we add, kind of like me with all my ignorance in different areas, like adding to kind of the mental checklist of, you know what, how is this going to be received? Is this going to be received, whatever it is, in the way that I'm intending? And especially with something that is in writing, in print, it's not like we're speaking. We do have a chance to kind of take a step back before we hit send. For me, that could be emails, letters, whatever, in my field. And for you, that's people's galleries, right? And whatnot. So, yeah, we're all learning, we're all growing.
So I want to use this as an example of how to have these tough conversations. And maybe most conversations that you might be having in your own life will be a little bit more innocuous. But there would have been, I mean, many ways to handle this situation on my part. And I really took it as a moment to sit and think and listen. Um, because I mean, I know what my intentions are, and I
Mhm.
know what I'm doing on this side of the computer. And obviously, my intention was not to offend or hurt
Of
your
course.
mother.
Of
Um,
course.
however, I think if I had responded with, well, that wasn't my intention, then I'm just dismissing the fact that she did feel those feelings. And I'm fairly certain that me saying, well, no, that would not make her feel any better about the situation.
Yeah. And would have been perhaps a surefire way to not have a repeat client, right? So in
Well,
terms of
for
just
sure.
thinking about, yeah, yeah.
Like someone's probably not going to like you very much if you just dismiss their feelings. I mean,
Hmm.
really, how do you feel when you're having even a conversation with your partner and you said, you did this thing and it made me feel this way, and they say like, well, I wasn't trying to. How do you feel
Hmm.
about that?
Hmm.
Not pretty good.
No, no.
Probably the beginnings of a pretty good argument. So,
Hmm. And therapy.
yeah, for sure. So, your mother feels the way that she does about this experience based on her life, what she has
Yeah.
lived, and that influences her feelings on anything that happens
Hmm.
for her day to day. So,
Hmm.
yeah, like I have to recognize that she did feel that way.
Hmm.
And I do not have to hear that and then be offended and then
Hmm.
react as if I am offended. I mean, I did do that. She
Hmm.
was hurt. And
Hmm.
I don't have to explain myself or explain it
Hmm.
away or dismiss her feelings. I
Hmm.
can hear what you had to say, and then I can
Hmm.
go on with my life and decide how I'm going to handle it. Obviously, this gives me something to think about next time I'm in a
Hmm.
similar type of situation, right? I have
Hmm.
real information that I can use in my life to
Hmm.
be more conscious and supportive of people in the future. I
Hmm.
learned something which I wouldn't
Yeah.
have done if I had said, no.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's so many people that will take that. No. I didn't do
Yeah.
anything wrong approach and
Hmm.
carry on. It takes someone who's willing to have some humility, and know that they don't know it all, and that even though this is their business, and I've encountered this with some clients as well, that maybe I missed the mark a bit on
Hmm.
my delivery of this service. I mean, in different contexts, I had a difficult conversation with a client back in March or so. And in this one, it was someone who felt as if, like we got the job done for, it was a refinance on a real estate transaction. Everything got done and closed on time. Um, but then there was some issue with the third party courier that was delivering some payouts on her refinance. Basically, it was Peer Later and they had lost one of the checks and said it was a storm on the tracking, and turns out it wasn't a storm. Like Peer Later just messed up. So she knew that that was out of our hands. And anyway, we were able to get the third party payout company to initiate a wire, put a stop order on that check. But for her, she felt as if I wasn't pushing hard enough. She was like, well, Pure Later should have to pay for, what is it, the $50 a day per diem for like 4 days. So it would have been like $200 that it cost her otherwise had the wire gone out on time. And so, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm like, it's $200. Like, I mean, you was already budgeted for in your per diem. You're already planning to pay that because we do a 5 day per diem. Um, and it's Pure Later. Like, it's a big company. Good luck getting any money back from them.
Hmm.
But her thing was she did not feel advocated. She felt
Hmm.
as if she felt dismissed. And my rational brain said, because it makes no financial sense. Like, you're not going to get anything from them. You, in fact, approved of sending the payouts by this route during our signing meeting. But then I had to take a step back and realize that the fact that she even thought about having this discussion with me shows that, I mean, she was saying she wanted to continue to work with me, wanted to support, and she was a fellow Black woman too. Much darker in skin tone than I am, had much more melanated. So I wonder if that also kind of played in, because I know that there is colorism within our community. And if she felt, she didn't put it in these terms, but I'm sure she may have felt that this light skinned Black lawyer did not want to advocate for me as a dark skinned, heavier set woman, as much as she probably would have maybe advocated maybe for a white woman client. There was that undertone. She didn't say that, but there was that intimation for it or about what she was saying. So I had to take a step back and say, okay, so rationally, I know the response is we did everything that we needed to do in the circumstances and we got your bill paid out on time, your mortgage paid out on time. But you still did not feel as if you were advocated for. And for that, I'm sorry. And I will take that and, add that to my repertoire in terms of how my actions, even if justified professionally, same thing with you there, may not have had the impact on the client that they were hoping for, looking for. And just something as simple as saying, not dismissing, when she says, why don't we contact Pure later? Just being like, maybe we should. What does it cost me? A quick email, a quick phone call, try a quick stern letter. If it doesn't get anywhere, at least the client feels I tried.
Hmm.
But for her, it was the lack of trying, even if legally justified, practically justified, that made her feel dismissed and not valued. And it's not being overly sensitive. It's just thinking about we're in client service industries. You want repeat clients. You want people to, praise your name to high heaven with all their loved ones, which is the best form of, marketing. Then we have to be attuned to how our services are being received. And there's so many in our fields, and lawyers are notorious for this as well, where there's no bedside manners, right? To use that term. So I always seek to improve and do better. And I took that to heart. It wasn't easy to hear.
Hmm.
In fact, I think I may have got slightly teary in defense at first, which was that whole reptilian, mind, because you pride yourself on good client service, but then realizing that And I thanked her. I was like, thank you for raising this with me, because you could have just been silent and not said anything.
Mhm.
And now I can improve my services to clients, yourself and others, just
Mhm.
by being aware, of that and how it could be received. That's one way that I could do better.
Mhm. Yeah, I think people might think that they're falling a little bit more on the fear side of like fear and anxiety. So, fear being the result of an emergent problem, like, a lion springs upon you. That's
Mhm.
fear. You're afraid for your life. And then there's anxiety, which is fear resulting from perceived events, what you
Mm-hmm.
think is going to happen, but might not actually be a reality. But
Mm-hmm.
we respond to things as if we are afraid rather than if we are anxious.
Yeah.
And walking around afraid to say the wrong thing to the wrong person is not a great way to live.
No.
And you have talked a little bit about support and that you need to speak in order to be supportive. I would say
Mm-hmm.
that if you are unsure, that also listening to people is a great way of being supportive. So,
Yes.
if you say something and someone comes to you and says, I really didn't like how you said that, and then you listen to what they have to say, A, you're probably going to make them feel a lot better simply by listening to what they have to say. And B, you're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to learn something that you can take with you in the
Mm-hmm.
future. And that'll
Exactly.
arm you with something that you can speak up with in the
Yes.
future. But if your
Absolutely.
response is, oh no, I don't think that way, and you fail to listen and you fail to learn something, then you're definitely not going to be effectively speaking up for people later on.
No.
And you're just perpetuating the problems that you already displayed, by
Yeah.
being a little bit ignorant. And again, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
listeners, you are ignorant. Deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Shut up, listen, and do better.
Yeah, exactly.
It can be
And
hard, as both Sophie and I have
yeah.
shared. It can be hard to shut up, listen in particular. The do better
Oh,
part, can flow from that. But yeah, I think the first two steps are often the hardest. But that's so essential to being able to do better, is to shut up and listen and actively listen, not just tune the people out. Like actually pay attention to what the person's saying.
for sure. And on the other side, I would say if we are expecting people to support in only one way, then we're probably going to be disappointed. But
Mm-hmm.
if we accept that someone shutting up and listening to us, if we accept that as support, then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden walking through life can be a lot more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell you that old colleague of Jason's, my husband's back
Mm-hmm.
at his engineering firm, they became very good friends. And I'm sure that that was due in large part to the fact that Arash felt as if he had an ally in the firm, somebody who would vouch for him,
Mm-hmm.
even if on paper less qualified. But he knew practically that this person had more clout simply because of who he was, a straight white man, in the company, but who was willing to look out for somebody else that did not move through the world the same way that he does,
Mm-hmm.
and give him a stage, give him, you know, an opportunity to speak, give him an opportunity to lead on a project, knowing that to someone who's also even more qualified. It's a disservice to be having someone so qualified, but yet not enabling them to do what they're trained to do. So, it can be very pleasant, the relationships that can come out if you're using your privilege. And even I, yes, as a Black woman, I've experienced racism, absolutely, and sexism, misogynoir, which is the discrimination against women, misogyny, but also Black women, misogynoir. But I also recognize my privileges. I'm a light-skinned Black woman. I speak without an accent most times, unless I break out the Jamaican accent, which so I can do what's called code switching. I can make myself more palatable to the standard white populace. And I know that between my education, the manner in which I speak, and my appearance, being mixed race of appearance, so not quote unquote too Black, not, too white, I'm more relatable to many white persons. And so as a result, I move through the world differently than, say, that client of mine that I told you about who is much more darker skinned and heavier set. So I'm attuned to that, and so when I have the floor, when I have an opportunity to be listened to, so then I offer that person, that space, or that community that space. And any doors that I can open for them, I try to do that. So, we all have our respective privileges. I know that when I'm speaking on the phone with clients and I sound perfectly Canadian, I'm more likely to land that client as somebody with a very thick foreign accent. That's a privilege. I don't feel guilty about it, but I realize that because of these privileges, I move through the world differently. How can I use that to better my neighbor? Could be a coworker, could be a client, could be a friend or family member, a stranger. But yeah, use your privilege, use the opportunities that come with that. And those are little ways that we can have ripple effects of positivity, frankly, and it may sound quite cliche and maybe golden brick road or yellow brick road kind of optimism. But honestly, I think we can really improve our communities just by doing little things like these and create more cohesiveness.
As you were speaking, I was just thinking making people feel seen and heard is such a big deal. And we talk about it with regard to students all the time, I think, and safe spaces in schools and gender neutral bathrooms. And, they have a counselor they can go to or a room they can go to in the day where they're feeling stressed to, be heard or relieve some stress. And I don't think that we do it so well as adults. Like we think we hit 18 and all of a sudden we're done. This is who I will be for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But you will continue to learn for the rest of your days.
Yeah.
Yep. You're probably going to have some experiences later in life that you have not had yet so far. It's going to give you some insight into things that you might have wished you'd never experience ever. But yeah. Old age.
Old age, indeed. Yes. Oh, this has been such a good conversation, Sophia. I really appreciate you inviting me to join.
I really appreciate you doing it.
Yay, no problem, no problem. I could talk about this stuff all day, but it's really with the goal of not judging others, but trying to see how can we create more, like we said, cohesive and honestly just friendlier, less divided communities, which is a benefit for everybody.
Absolutely. So we like to close the show with a ridiculously happy moment. Do you have one ready to go? Something that made you smile. It could be your Jupiter drawings near.
I have Jupiter, I have Venus, and I have Earth. And yes, those definitely make me smile. And I know that they do end one day. So soaking up that sweetness of that, right? And yeah, I think that's a just ridiculously happy moment. Just honestly, the life that we have. I know it's kind of echoing my earlier, point at the start of the podcast, but being able to just look outside a beautiful forest and exhale. Yeah, I still have an endless to-do list, but I can slow down and breathe and hammer it away at it slowly and really live a work-life integration that I'd only hoped for, but now have made reality. It makes me ridiculously happy.
something else we're going to have to talk about at some point.
Yes. Part 2. How about you?
My ridiculously happy moment would be I got a text the other day from the owner of my studio building, and they are painting the stairway, which has been the same industrial kind of dirty stairway since we got here. And I arrived this morning, and they're actually changing the colors. So that's cool. It's going to be a nice, fresh little look to it. And
Yeah.
I walked all the way up the stairs and didn't touch anything. So good for me.
Okay, good. You didn't get any paint on you.
Exactly.
That is a miracle. I think everybody has to like slow clap for Sophia right there. So
Yes.
that is awesome.
Especially since I'm a total klutz.
Well, that was the insight. I remember, you shared that with me in the past before. So I was like, that is a small miracle. Folks, that is a slow clap. That is a slow clap.
And if you would like to share your ridiculously happy moment, you can send it to us on social media, and you can also record your own to be played on the show. And you can do that at happyp.pl/moment. happyp.pl/moment. So it's happy people, but with a period in it.
There you go. Don't let the period throw you off.
Exactly. Where can people find you?
People can find me at our website, www.beeksmalaw.ca. That is B as in Benjamin, EEKSMALAW.ca. I know you'll include it in the podcast info. And we have offices in Owen Sound, Collingwood, as well as Hamilton. So on our website, you have the contact info for our 3 offices. There are 2 lawyers here, myself and Hortense. You can get in touch with us through there. We'll be happy to help you with any of your legal needs, whether they're in estate law or real estate law or business law. We've got you covered. So thank you again for having me. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. And you work online, so people are not
remotely.
restricted to being in those 3 places.
No. We actually hardly ever go to the office, only when the client really needs an in-person meeting or requests one. Otherwise, 99% of our work is done remotely. So you can get all your legal work done with us through the convenience of your smartphone, tablet, or computer, and phone, obviously. And it's as easy as that. You need not leave your house in most cases. So we're happy to make things as easy. Exactly. You can be in like Zoom where the business on the top and party on the bottom, fuzzy slippers, leggings, jammies. We don't really care. We don't judge you because we won't know. We probably are in fuzzy slippers too, while still being on our Zoom calls. So, and with that, I see my little people have entered the room. It's as a perfect wrap up. So, yes. Thank you again for having me, Sophia.
Thank you for doing the podcast. And I am Sophia Lemon, and I photograph ridiculously happy people. And you can find me on Instagram at ridiculously happy people. That's PPL. On Facebook and Pinterest, and at sophialemon.com. We also invite you to join our Facebook community at Ridiculously Happy People. And again, that is PPL. And thank you for making the time to listen to this episode. We hope you feel inspired to live a little more kindly, more confidently, and more ridiculously happy. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review in your podcast app of choice. Your feedback is so important in helping us spread this ridiculously happy movement. And remember that happiness is contagious. So who do you know who always seems to be overly busy? Share this show with them and help them slow down for a moment. You can find the shareable links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.